the two levels that there is in the avoid of a yid. There's l'mayla matam v'das, not pitam v'das. There's a level of Torah, which is al pitam v'das, and then there's a level of the ava b'chol moedecha. That's a l'mayla matam v'das, or the difference between ava b'chol vavcha b'chol nafshcha. That's al pitam v'das. According to Seichel, midah v'agbola, it's a gather of gvul, whereas there's the avoida that's in a way it's l'mayla matam v'das that doesn't have agbolas. And we start to explain that we also mentioned that both of these things are to be found in Shema Yisrael, in the Parsha Rishoina, ve'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levav b'chol nafsh b'chol medecha, and v'dibarta bam, talks about Torah, talks about Ava, talks about two levels of Ava, three levels, but in this context we're only dividing it into two. And we also mentioned that this has to do with what it says, Bitzalmeinu Kidmuseinu, that these two levels, the level that is b'medida v'agbola, and the level that's l'mayla b'medida v'agbola, these reflect two levels in Elikus. There is the level of medida v'agbola in Elikus, and that is Bitzalmeinu, and then there's Kidmuseinu, that's the level that's higher than medida v'agbola. And since we concluded, since everybody was made Bitzalmeinu Kidmuseinu, then therefore each one of us has both types of avodah, both beyond measure and boundary, and within measure and boundary, beyond intellect and within the rational reasoning. So now he's going to explain something that I mentioned a little while back. What is the connection between Salmeinu and Museinu to these two levels of Tam Vadas, or Medida Vagbola, versus higher than Medida Vagbola, higher than Tam Vadas? So he begins in Ois Dalet, line 6, page Ches. The explanation of this matter is the Nixiv, says in the pasuk, Nasa Adam Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu. That Eibusher said, let's make Adam in our form and in like to us, similar to us. The Koi Allah Avodah Shel Pitam V'das B'Tzalmeinu. Earlier we identified this, that these are the two types of Avodah. The one that's according to reason and intellect, that's B'Tzalmeinu, that's in our form. The avodah that's beyond reason and knowledge, that is in our likeness. That is the level of our avodah of l'mayla mitam v'das. Now, the reason why we have it is because we're in tzelem and dvus shalamayla, because there's the thing above that way. Vishnei in Yonameilu and Bidum Shalamayla, and these two matters are similar to above. When it says in our form, that means that Eibusher is saying that he's creating Adam in our form. In other words, that we have this level of Alpitam Vadas, or level of Medida Vagbola, and we are creating a person to be Bitzalmeinu in our form, to have this as well. The same thing that says in our likeness, that it's the likeness of us. So in other words, just like we have a level that's beyond Tam Vadas, beyond Medida Vagbola, that is how we're creating the person. These are the two aspects that we mentioned before. Serving the Eibishter, or a love that's with all your heart, and then with all your might, b'chol meidach. Oops, I'm sorry. We already learned this, but since we started, we'll go this over. That in the avoidam, the ava b'chol meidecha kol atshuka v'ava shelo yilah Hashem Elokecha shenamar lifnei zeh. His entire desire and love is to Hashem Elokecha, that says beforehand. That's what it means. V'havas Hashem Elokecha b'chol vavcha b'chol nafshcha b'chol meidecha. So the words meidecha is referring back to the Avatar Eibishter. So too it's in the love of with all your heart and with all your soul. It's avodah that's measured, has a boundary, it's according to rational understanding. His entire goal and purpose and what he's focused on, to love Hashem your God, to be in a cleaving to delight in Hashem, your God. That's what it means. When you're loving something, you enjoy that thing that you are loving. Your power and your vitality. That the Eibishter becomes, the Havaya becomes your power, your strength, your vitality. But the difference is, there's a difference between them. The avoid with all your heart and all your soul is in our form. Like we said before, that's a limited level. The avoid with all your might is in our likeness, as we started saying before that entire thing. So now he's finally going to break down and say, what is this idea of tselem and the mus? Why is one rational and one is super rational, one is limited, one is unlimited? I say, this is where we left off yesterday. The idea of a form and a likeness, be understood, for example, from a craftsman that makes a statue, a form, three-dimensional form, midavar zar, from some foreign material. He makes a statue out of metal. He makes a statue out of wood. He cuts into it a form of legs, and he cuts into it the trunk of the body, and he cuts into it the head. In such a way that the way how the limbs and the form of the body is equal to a human being. It takes the entire shape of a human being, of the same height, length, breadth. This is called tselem, a statue. Top of page test. To be like the matter itself. It's not just a likeness. It's not just something similar. Like, for example, perhaps a painting that you paint of a person. It's not fully three-dimensional. It's not the same height, width, breadth. It doesn't have all the details that a statue would have. So the Rebbe goes on to say, when the craftsman is worthy of his name, in other words, he's a very good artist, then he can form also the spirituality and vitality of the person. He can give it life. He can breathe life into the art that he's making. That it should seem as if the statue itself is has a very bright, luminous face, has a very smiling countenance. That they do this through different etching lines in the statue's face, for example, and using different types of shades and colors, that through that it seems to be as if this particular statue literally is coming alive. But this is only something that is a likeness. There's no comparison whatsoever to the vitality that the artist gives to his art, to the statue, to the actual life force that's in the person himself. It might mimic and imitate life, but it's nothing close to it. That is one concept. Let's see further. He says in line 10, but and its similarity above, the form, like the statue, the three-dimensional image, is referring to the worlds of Bri, Yitzir, Vasiya. The Afshalakus Sham Helam, though godliness is concealed in the worlds of Bri Tzirasiyam, Hadehim Mekal Makim Ulmis Elikim, they're still in all godly worlds. The Kivim Shadargis Elikus Shabahem, even the Devak Bola, since the level of godliness that's in them is measured and has a boundary, is Yesh Erech V'Hishtavos La'avodas Ha'adam. There is a comparison and a similarity to the service of a person. Sheyachol Lahagia B'Avodasei Lias Ba'Ofen Shel Tzalmeinu Tzalm Shalom. That with his avodah he could reach there. It's considered our form. There is enough of a similarity between the limited aspect of godliness in Biyah and the created limitation of man. Similar to like a statue bears this similarity in height, in breadth, in all 3 dimensions, and it's cutting out of the different limbs, etc., to the person that it's supposed to represent. So he says, we see this similar thing also by Malach. Similar to the service of Malach. Malach in Yoni Shliach. The idea of a Malach is a Shliach. That's actually the literal translation of the word Malach in Lashon HaKodesh. That means a Shliach. That's why Rashi at the beginning of our parsha had to say, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, and Yaakov sent Malachim Mamish, meaning Mamish angels, because Malachim in Torah can be meant as messengers. So even the Malach, who we always call Malach, is what's his idea? Why is he called a Malach? Because he's a Shliach. He is not an independent being who is completely nullified to the godly life force that's in him. That's what it means being a Shliach. He's completely nullified to his mission. And that's why that's why it says Malachim don't die. Malachim are always existing because the Chayes Alaki, the godly life force, is everlasting, and they have no other identity except for the life force of God. So therefore, the Malachim are everlasting. This is also the reason why, and the Alter Rebbe brings this down in Tanya as well, the reason why a Malach can say things like, I am promising you this. He's speaking as if he's Hashem, because the Shliach is not a Metzias for himself. The Malach, when he's on a mission from Hashem, at least, Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, he is not himself like. He's not an independent entity. He's speaking the words of Hashem, so he calls himself Hashem, and he's speaking on behalf of Hashem. He has no Metzias. So, just like a Malach is completely batal, the same thing, the person, so a person's avoida can also be in the type of bittul like a Malach, which is tzalmeinu, which is an avoida that's al pitam v'das, that is batal to the chayes alaki, that's in the worlds, that's limited. So right away he challenges that. How can you compare and say that a person can have the same avodah like a malach? Though the malachim are called separated intellects, that's what the Rambam calls them. What's the meaning of separated intellects? They are separated from the material and from the physical. And they're beyond time and place. So it's understood how they can be completely bought b'tachlis to the chayes alaki. How can you say that a person can have a similar type of avodah? So first of all, we got to qualify when we say that they're beyond time and space. In truth, in truth, they are higher than physical time and space. Also, malachim find themselves under a spiritual idea of time and space. So the Rebbe brings a very interesting Rambam. That the Rambam says that there are different malachim. Now, if there are no different bodies to separate them. The Rambam says, so what makes a multiplicity of malachim? If they're all like doing the same thing and thinking the same thing, they're spiritual entities. Spiritual entities cannot be separated by the physical. So if they're identical, then they're really one thing. So he says, before, but Rambam, line 26, like explain the Rambam, shemokim beruchnius hu inyan hamayla. The idea of space in the spiritual sense is the idea of levels. So he explains that there is malachim that are higher than each other. Obviously, it's not physical space. They are not physical, and they are not living they're not taking up a physical place, and they're not living in a physical space. But we're saying one malach is higher than another. It means their place is higher spiritually. Just like you would say that this person's wisdom is higher than another person's wisdom. Where do we see that there's differentiations between malachim? Sharigam, malachim yeshchilukim, madreges, osam malachim. There's different levels. That Gabriel is the minister in charge of fire, and Michal is the minister in charge of water. That itself shows you that there's different levels of malachim. That's why fire expresses what Gabriel is, and water expresses what Michal is. Machne Michal Kuf Peivav Elf Machnes, and the camp of Michal is 186,000 camps, and in those camps there's many malachim. So how do you have all these different camps? What divides them? Every malach has to be distinct. Every malach has to be unique, or else it's the same power. It's a godly power and revelation in the malach. The division of these levels, that is the idea of place that there is in malach. Top of page Yud. So too, in the spiritual realms, there's also the level of spiritual time. What is spiritual time? Though there's no time the way we have it down here, but the idea of time in the spiritual realms is it's the idea of something that precedes and something that is later. Time means that this must precede that. First, we must have, let's say, the avoid of Kabbalah oil, then we can have the avoid of Tam V'das. And after we have the avoid of Tam V'das, then we can have L'mayla Tam V'das. Usually it goes in that order. Or in an Ilava Olul, or there's things that are cause and effect, like you have Seichel brings about Midas, Chochmah brings about Bina, and so on. So that is spiritual time, because A must precede B. Shebachlolas, in general, these ideas of Zman, of time, is to be found the malachim of those worlds of Bri Yitzir Asiyah. Or not just the time, but this idea of Ilah Va'ol. The malachim of the world of Asiyah are a result of and caused by the malachim that's in the world of Yitzira. And the malachim of the world of Bria are caused by the malachim that's in the malachim Yitzira are caused by the malachim in Bria. So therefore, there is spiritual time, even though Bria, Yitzira, Asiyah were all created simultaneously, and the whole creation was beyond time. But the fact that you cannot have the malachim of Asiyah without first having the malachim of Yitzira, you cannot have the malachim of Yitzira before first having the malachim of Bria. Note I said before, even though it's not time, because that's spiritual time. A must precede B. Well, the prati is, more specifically, not just in the malachim of these three worlds, but yeshli inyan ilav va'ol gamba malachim shebachol olam gufa. There's also the idea of cause and effect. Also in the malachim of every world, specifically, there are differences. There is not differences, but there's an order of precedence. Higher malachim that must precede the lower malachim in love. All this, the idea of spiritual time. So now that we've established that malachim are also under the limitations of spiritual time and spiritual place, so it's not that far to compare a yid that's under limitations of physicality, that he has the avodah that's based on medida v'agbola, that's a bounded limit avodah, with malachim, that their avodah is medida v'agbola because they're bound by spiritual space and time. So he says, v'nimtza line 9, shagam avodah malachim medida v'agbola, also the avodah malachim is measured and bounded, k'moy avodah neshamas lamata, just like the avodah of the neshamas down here below. The difference with Raksha Avodah Malachim Medidus is Manu Makim Ruchni. That Avodah Malachim is in the boundaries and measurements of spiritual limitations. The Avodah Neshamas Lamatim Medidus is Manu Makim Gashmi. The service and the Avodah of Neshamas down here below is in the measurements of physical time and space. And now the Rebbe says it's not a negative, but it's actually a positive power of the neshamas, that they're able to handle physical limitations more than malachim. Okay, continuing on line 14, or the end of 13, and this is actually recognized the advantage of neshamas over malachim. The reason why malachim are spiritual is not because how great they are. They earn their place, let's say, in the spiritual realms, but actually they are spiritual because they cannot go down into the physical. They cannot handle the physical. Because they cannot be in the physical, and along with that, to be cleaving to godliness, the way they are cleaving to godliness while they are above. And as we know, the stories of the Nephilim, the Malachim that came down into this world, and they were even worse than people, etc., etc. As opposed to Neshamas Yardim, L'guf Gashmi descent, a physical body, V'gam Sham, Harei Melakus K'mashim L'mayla, also down here below. They are godliness, like they are above. That's the entire idea of the neshama. It's godliness that became in a state that's created. Therefore, in other words, it's a commingling of two opposites. Godliness and creation together. So it means even while being down here, we call it chelik el kamimal. Like we brought that before, like I mentioned outside, that the Malach, at the time that he's doing Hashem's mission that he sent him on, so he's called by the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. He says, Ani Hashem Adover Alecha, even though it was a Malach, because of the Shem Havai that was residing in him and giving him life at the time, that he's completely bottled to at the time that he's doing the Shlichus. How much more so that so it is concerning the neshama also in its descent down here below in the body. Even at a time that he's not fulfilling Torah mitzvahs. So by the neshama, it's in such a way that it's potential. He has that Shem Hashem Asher Bekir. So he has the identification with Elikus even being down here. Another idea that the Neshamas have over Malachim, line 27. In addition to this, there's another advantage in the Neshamas down here below over Malachim. The Malachim are only in a movement of rushing towards Hashem, pulling towards Hashem. They're not about godliness being brought down here. How come? Why are they? Their spiritual experience in avodah only in the way of Ratzi. The reason for this is because the way they came into being is only from a ray of Hashem. Even top of page Aleph, since every ray, every light that comes out of its source, it wishes to be reconnected with its source. Therefore, in the Malachim, there is the idea of ascent and elevation and rising up. And that's the idea of Ratzu that we just now said. Mashenkin, Neshamas as opposed to Neshamas, Hareiheim, Elikus Be'etzim, so they are essentially godliness, El Shenasu B'chinas Nivra, but their godliness, the way it became a created being. Therefore, it could have both components. Ha'inyan da'Allah, both the idea of rising up. Like it says, that the spirit will return to the Eibshter. It's talking about an neshama down here. That's in a way of returning to Hashem, in a way of Ratzi. Also, the idea of drawing down godliness from above to below in a physical time and physical place. The since the neshama is godliness, the way it became a created being, so it could have the shuv, it could have the idea of bringing godliness down here. It draws down its source from above to below in physical time and physical place. So this is another advantage that neshamas have over malachim. That beforehand the Rebbe was challenging himself, how can I compare a neshama to a malach and say that just like the malach has an avodah that's al pitam v'da, so too the neshama can have. So we're saying even more so, the neshama has qualities that the malach doesn't have at all. So he goes on in line 11, all of this that we said, that there's the level of the neshama, the way it serves based on intellect, based on limitations, that is concerning the avoid of the neshama as it reflects the level of godliness that's in the worlds of Bri Yitzir Asiyah, because the levels of godliness in the world of Bri Yitzir Asiyah is also a limited level of godliness. We said that B'Tzalmenu, it reflects what it comes from. So there's a level of godliness that's a limited level, that's a rational level, and from that comes out the avoida by Yid in a limited rational level. Amnam, line 13, L'maylam Ezel B'chinas Tahoida, he higher than the avoida of the neshama. That's a result of the godliness in the worlds of Biyam. There's the level of neshama, that's the level of Tahoidi, like we say every morning in davening. Neshama Shnasat to be Tahoidi, Ati Yitzarta, Ati Baros, Ati Yitzarta, Nafach to be. So first there's a level of Tahoida. What is the level of the neshama, the way it's pure? The Koyal B'chinas HaNeshama K'moshe B'Atzilus, that refers to the neshama, the way it's still in the world of Atzilus prior to Baros, Yitzarta, Nafach. Even the level of Tahoidihi, it doesn't say Neshama Tahoidihi, and then he says Nasata bi Brosi Tzarta Nafachta. But we say Neshama Shenasata bi. The Neshama you placed in me is already Tahoidihi. In other words, the Tahoida aspect has to do with me. Hainu Gam Shagam Madregezu Sheikh Zachal Neshama Pratis. Also the level of Tahoidihi, also the level of the Neshama, the way it's Natzilus, is applicable to every individual neshama. Shesham ein afilu hagbalas dezman u'makom ruchni. Over there in the level of the neshama, the way it's Tahoidihi, there are no limitations of spiritual time and place. Shezohi dargus alakus shalamaylam didavagbola. That's the level of godliness, the level of Tahoidihi, the level of Atzilus is beyond measure and boundary. The limitations of time and place, says, was first created in Malchus Datzilus. What is in my avoida, a type of avoida that reflects that, going beyond boundaries? Like it says in line 19 about avoida, so Adam who in the ru'us dalibam, the avoida of a person is the idea of the will of the heart. It's the love with all your might. It's beyond measure and boundary. When we say that we reflect and we have a likeness to the level above of L'maylo Didvag Bola, so we're saying it's only a likeness, just like when an artist imbues life to their art. It's incomparable to real life, it's only a likeness. So the same thing, the way we have an avoida that's higher than Medida Vagbola, so it's also only considered the mus v'dimyon levad l'gava bligvul shalamayla. It's only something that's a likeness to the bligvul of above. So even though Hashem is Bligvul, and because He is unbounded and unlimited, He imparted within us a likeness, a similarity, that we also go out of our boundaries, but our going out of our boundaries is not the same as by Hashem, the level of Bligvul. Whereas the Tzalmeinu, being the form, that the form is like taking the exact form of the limbs, taking the exact measurements of the body, taking the entire three-dimensional thing. So when we in our avodah, that's all pitam vadas, the avodah that's according to Medid of Agbola, that's in the form that's identical or at least similar enough to the avodah from the Elokus from Bri Yitzir Asiyah. As we'll continue elaborating tomorrow.